Good evening, I am Amadin Ogbewe. Now, as the race to 2023 picks up in intensity and presidential hopefuls make their declarations public, the political parties have also been seen making moves in preparations. With the APC still in the process of holding a national convention and the PDP beginning its presidential journey, it's become evident that more is yet to come. Joining me tonight to speak about the impact of party politics on governance is PDP chieftain Ose Anenih. All right, Mr. Ose Anenih, welcome to Tough Talk.
Glad to be here.
All right, now, we're going to talk about the current intrigues leading up to 2023. But before we get there and all the things that have been happening recently, I'd like to ask, what has it been, the experience been like moving from being in power to opposition? And what are the lessons you feel the PDP has learned during this time?
That's a really good question. I think the main lesson was or is one of humility. When we assumed power, if you recall, it was, we had just taken over from the military, so to say. And, democracy in this current iteration was new and fresh to everyone. It was also at the time supposed to sort of, in some way, make good what had happened to Abiola when his own election was annulled. So it was a national celebration, and at the time the PDP's victory was a national one. But very quickly, I think when politicians started to realize just how much power they actually wielded, just how much power was available to the Nigerian state, you started seeing pockets of impunity grow. And I'm saying PDP, but of course, like for instance in the Southwest where we had a very strong opposition, it was the same thing. You started seeing politicians who had previously been activists start to act with a level of impunity that was very, very similar to the ways and manners of our former military dictators. And I think, up until we lost in 2015, I think we felt we were unbeatable. I think we felt we were the face of democracy in Nigeria. And the number one lesson, I think, was one of humility. You quickly realize that in a democracy, if you do not perform, and even if you do and people don't want you, they can kick you out like they did us. And since then, we sort of have found our way back to not just being in opposition for opposition's sake, but trying to make a superior argument to the people that this is why this time we represent the better option.
All right. What about in terms of mistakes that were made in terms of losing power, actually? What do you think were the things that happened or that the PDP did that actually set it up for that 2015, what I call it, loss? Are there any lessons you've learned there or if you could, hypothetically speaking, if you go back in time, what would the PDP have done differently to retain control?
That's another very interesting question. I think the lesson we learned, or the mistake, and I'm saying in quotes, the mistake we made was that we grew middle class. We grew an independent middle class who could think for themselves, who were not beholden to the state, who could afford to make political decisions without fear of consequence or repercussions from the Nigerian state or from government. That's what we did. And it was this vocal, vibrant, young middle class that sort of was like the linchpin and the tipping point that pushed us out of power. That was the mistake, again in quotes, the PDP made. And the APC has learned from that mistake. And what have they done? They have impoverished Nigeria. They have crushed that middle class. Everybody is in one way or shape or form now a member of a welfare state. If you're not paying someone's school fees, you're helping with rent or with hospital bills or with transportation, now with diesel, with food. We have become so impoverished. The voting electorate have become so impoverished And when you talk about the weaponization of poverty, it's almost impossible now to lose an election if you are in power, because you control the purse strings, and you are the one, they say who pays the piper dictates the tune. And if you have an impoverished, starving, desperately poor voting public, your seat is almost guaranteed. So I think the APC learned that lesson. They learned that when you have a vibrant, educated, prosperous society, they can make truly democratic decisions. And you can see the fruits of that lesson sprouting now and germinating now and flourishing now. And I say that to say that 2023 will probably be our most financially influenced elections. It will be violent because you now have the monies to procure an army of thugs, of poor young people who don't have any other options. Education has been tanked, so you aren't educating these young people. You also then have a desperately poor public who you can influence at the ballot box with money. So in quotes again, I say it's a mistake, but it's the nature of democracy. You have to ensure that society prospers, and you have to put yourself in a situation where if you fail, citizens can vote you out. So I wouldn't call it a mistake. That's why we lost, because we gave citizens the power to vote us out. If there's any silver lining, just thinking about it, it probably is the recently signed Electoral Amendment Act. Yes, we are still desperately poor, but the act in a certain way guarantees that maybe there will be some transparency at the ballot boxes. So what happens at the ballot boxes is what will be declared by INEC.
All right. Ironically, the picture you've painted is actually what, because I've had a sit down with a lot of APC stalwarts, and they paint the same picture, but they come to a different conclusion. That the reason the middle class or whatever, that we used to see persons, who could buy cars, who could get homes, was that because PDP was, quote unquote, sharing the money. And, they were sharing the national cake. But now that President Buhari has come, there's not as much corruption. So people are feeling a little bit of stress, but that it will get better. How do you respond to that?
The APC was a brilliant contraption for securing power. I haven't seen anything of the sort in recent memory, especially in Africa. So it knows how to seek power. It knows how to manipulate minds. It knows how to shape narratives. And they did that brilliantly in 2014, 2015, where they turned Nigeria against a president that was driving the country towards double-digit GDP growth. And they demonized and criminalized prosperity. They demonized and criminalized a young bank executive being able to pay for car loans or be able to pay for mortgages. Now, I'm not talking about slipping envelopes under the table. I'm talking about working class people being able to afford credit. We started having credit agencies. We started having credit cards, if you remember. And they demonized all that to say, you know what, we're going to now have a general, a no-nonsense disciplinarian who will come and fix Nigeria. We all know that corruption hasn't gone. It has actually gotten worse. We are sliding down on all Transparency International scales of corruption. Insecurity isn't helping. We are getting more and more insecure as a state. And if we talk about institutionalized corruption, I can mention things like the trader money programs and the other trader people's things that they roll out on the eve of elections, that the Western governments have said were vote buying tools, policy tools by the federal government. I can talk about your Magu, your former EFCC chairman, indicted for corruption. I can talk about your NNPC. I can talk about their fuel subsidy scheme that's so opaque. Nobody knows what's happening. It has ballooned to the point where we are now borrowing money, $2.2 billion, to pay for subsidies. Because not only are we broke, we are corrupt, and we are no longer even in a point where revenues are paying for debt, for expenditure. We've gone way past that. We are now borrowing, going to the capital market, foreign capital markets, to borrow money to pay for fuel consumption. That's where we are. And that has nothing to do with any legacy the PDP left. I think it's just, again, going back to the reason for the APC. It was to seek power. It wasn't to govern. It wasn't to prosper the nation. They succeeded in holding on to power. And I don't know if we'll get the chance to talk about it, but simply because the APC was only to secure power, you can see the cracks even within the APC. You can see them falling apart. Because really, it's, the argument that they made in 2015 cannot be used to run a country. And we've had the last 8 years to show that propaganda really is not a recipe for good governance.
All right, that's fair. But we will get to that, like you said. But before we get to that, let's talk about the PDP now. What specifically is going on within the party? I know there have been, although a lot of PDP chieftains and stalwarts will say that, look at our convention, it was smooth, everything is going fine and all that. But we had, some hiccups here and there. I think in Ekiti and Osun, or mostly Ekiti, not Osun. Osun was just a family matter anyway, so I can't really see that was a PDP issue. And then, that being said, and also now, the one that is on the airwaves now, the squabble between two PDP governors and thereabouts. So, are these any cause for concern?
It was interesting you mentioned our very successful national convention. I was an electoral officer at that convention. And I spoke about a sense of hope that the convention gave, not just us as PDP members, but I think of the entire nation at the time. Because it, just the way it was organized, just the way we went about it, it signaled that, this time we were ready to truly give a challenge for power, a credible challenge for power. You spoke about a squabble between two governors. I think sometimes, we as Nigerians, we like drama. It's entertainment. We like entertainment, and we stay away from the issues. What had happened between Governor Wike and Governor Baseki was simply a disagreement, a public disagreement between two very, very strong-minded governors. And again, the party, I always talk about, our DNA. Our DNA was one of conflict resolution, of actually avoiding problems. Again, because we were always standing in the shadow of the military, who were just waiting for an opportunity to come back and grab power. So every time we had a conflict, the PDP had to learn to make sure those conflicts never erupted to the point where, national conversations or national progress was imperiled. And that's what's going to happen between Governor Wike and my governor, Governor Baseki. The PDP had already set up a committee, a 3-member committee, to look into and try to resolve the issues between them. It's a truly internal issue. I think it's just one of a misunderstanding between them. Maybe one of expectations and deliverables, but it's not, I think, reflective of our ability to take over power from the APC and chart a path towards prosperity for Nigeria.
Right. Now, the same question, I'm sure your answer will be a bit different now, but now for the APC. For your party, I mentioned Osun, Ekiti, and the governors squabbling. But for APC, we have the issues of the CECPC chairman moving from Buni to another governor, to the president now coming in to take a decisive stand and all that. And there have been a lot of issues here and there, and also the inability to actually hold a convention at the moment, but there's a date. And, to add to that, the president said recently in his letter to the APC stalwarts that if care is not taken, these cracks or these issues could lead to the demise of the party. Now, like I said, when I asked, what happened in the PDP, are there cause for concern? With the APC, do you think this is also cause for concern? Do you think they're in trouble?
So there's a difference between tensions in the PDP and the implications and tensions in the APC. For instance, you spoke about Ekiti.
Yes.
Ekiti had primaries. I have the highest respect for former governor, Engineer Segun Oni. I know him personally. He's a brilliant man. But he disagreed with the primaries, with the outcome of the primaries, and he decided to seek his fortunes elsewhere. But that is what, to my mind, I think Democrats can do. You always have that option of expressing yourself on any platform. It's not one I would encourage, but like I said, I know the man, and he's a rational man, so I wish him well. It doesn't, again, I want to make it clear, it doesn't affect the outcome of the PDP primaries. I hope it doesn't affect the outcome of the general elections, because as a PDP member, we'll be running against my senior brother, who is now an SDP man. I hope we win. I can only wish him good luck. It doesn't affect that. Democracy still marches on. If you move to the APC, I want to take you back to when Oshomole was their national chairman, and how impunity and an inability to follow their own constitution cost them Zamfara. They won that Zamfara election by almost 200,000 votes, I think. But because they didn't hold elections and primaries, the Supreme Court awarded it to PDP. It cost them Rivers. Because they couldn't hold primaries, Governor Wike virtually ran unchallenged. The APC did not field candidates in the Rivers State 2019 elections. It may, and I've been saying this, it could have cost them Ondo when the Supreme Court ruled that even if, I think it was very technical, that the issue of Buni's fitness for office or legitimacy wasn't being challenged, so it couldn't sit on it. But it did pronounce that there were issues there. Because the way that Buni came in, and Buni, the chairman of this caretaker committee, came in, was by executive fiat. Buhari summoned the APC National Executive Committee to the villa, and by executive fiat, Oshomole was removed, and Buni was appointed in violation of their own constitution. And I have been warning that even though I'm a PDP member, I'm a Democrat. And we may find ourselves in a situation where the APC is unable to field any candidate for any seats anywhere in the country. Because that is what the president was warning against. I don't know if you saw INEC's letter to them. They said constitutional, you have to give 21 days notice to hold any convention. And that is why they've reverted to Buni. They tried to, by executive fiat again, remove him. They were warned that there might be electoral implications. And the president in his letter said, because of these challenges, because we don't want to face litigation, let us revert back to the status quo, just for the purposes of us being able to hold this convention. So the president shares my concerns, that these are not issues we can wave over, with a cloth or whatever. These are not partisan issues. I'm not speaking now as a PDP member, I'm speaking as a Nigerian. There are PDP's governed states, there are APC governed states. I think every Nigerian who can vote should be allowed to choose between everybody. Whether you want to vote PDP, APC, SDP, YPP, everybody should be allowed to contest. And the ruling party is imperiling our democracy because they are acting in a way that might see them totally disqualified from the 2023 election. So it's not the same thing. And I truly hope that they get their house in order. I want to beat them at the elections in 2023. I don't want them to hand us a fait accompli. There's nobody we're challenging against, and then the PD walks over, because that truly is not the face of democracy.
That's fair. And now, on the flip side, we have the warnings from the president to the APC. Well, on the side of the PDP, we also have a warning from the former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. Now, he says that if the PDP do not win 2023 elections, it could mean them going into becoming irrelevant. Because I was talking with an analyst the other day, and he said that as things go in Nigeria, if you manage to win a first term, chances are most likely you're going to win the second term because you have the state power behind you and all that. So that being said, what do you make of the VP's warning? And then I'll ask a follow-up question, but let me just know first, what do you make of that warning that if the PDP do not clinch power in 2023, then is pretty much over?
The PDP held power. I think the APC is going to, by 2023, they will have held power for 8 years.
Yes.
The PDP held power for 16 years, and we lost an election. I think our former vice president and a presidential aspirant is maybe scaremongering, because he was also making the argument that he's best positioned to win the election for the party.
Yes.
So you need to link that. He says that if we don't lose 2023, if we don't win 2023, the PDP is dead, and I'm the only person who can win the election. So it's not an unbiased statement. I think it would be cause for worry for the party, but if we have free and fair elections, I don't think it's as dire a picture as he paints. We also forget we're going to have 36 odd state governorship elections. We are going to have National Assembly elections. I'm running, for instance, for the House of Representatives in my constituency. It's 2 local government areas that since 1999 have been PDP. So whatever happens at the national doesn't really affect some of these smaller House of Assembly, House of Reps and Senate elections. But we tend to just focus on the national and give it this outsized importance. So, I mean, the former vice president was campaigning and is entitled to campaign as he sees fit. But as a PDP member, I don't think. I think we are going to put our best foot forward. The primaries will determine who we think is best suited to win the election for us. And even if we don't win, if the elections are free and fair, then I think Nigeria has won.
That's interesting. I didn't want to mention it till you did about how that statement was in relation to his campaigning.
Yeah.
But now, that being said, let's go to the issue of zoning now. Because I've actually been present when Chief Dr. Amadin Ogbewe has been, would I say, canvassing or basically speaking on behalf of the VP to come again. And the major argument that he keeps bringing is that the PDP, during the 16 years of the PDP, there was 8 years southwest or south, and then Jonathan came again, and Yar'Adua only had, I think, 2 years or so. And so they're saying that in the interest of zoning, it is the time of the north, and that, and again, perhaps maybe it's because it's a party issue, but he completely, or Atiku's group completely ignores the fact that there is a president in power now who is from the north and is going to spend 8 years there. They just speak about PDP and, the zoning within the party. Now, that being said, how do you see this being resolved? Because a lot of people have a lot of arguments. I've heard a little bit from persons from the North Central that the North Central has never had power of the 6 geopolitical zones. The North Central and the Southeast have never had a president or vice, and so on and so on. So it seems like a complex issue. How do you see the PDP resolving this? Okay,
so I will speak first of all as an analyst before I start speaking as a PDP member. It's not a complex issue. The zoning thing is very simple. You rotate north and south, and then when you get to the north or south, you then start microzoning. So if it comes south now, like you said, President Buhari will be finishing a northern 8-year term. It should come to the south. And when you look into the south, we look across the 3 regions. Obasanjo has done 8 years for the southwest. We've had Jonathan do maybe 6 odd years for the south-south. We've never had, in this at least democratic cycle, we've never had a southeastern president. It should, if we're not being intellectually dishonest, we all know it should go to the south. It should also go to the south just because of where we are as a nation today, where we have a section of the country, that's the southeast, that feels they do not belong to this entity called Nigeria. Real or imagined, they feel marginalized. They feel they can never aspire. I'm from Edo State. I can aspire to become president, but I have family and friends from the southeast that it escapes their imagination. It's almost an impossible dream. And you cannot build a united nation if one of our legs, doesn't feel it belongs to this table or this platform is holding up, the table will fall or collapse or crumble. Yeah. So if we are being serious and we're not just playing politics, we all know that the next president should come from the southeast, and not former eastern region that extends to Delta and rivers and all of that. No, we know the there are 5 southeastern states. The next president should come from there. If I want to wear my political hat, then we can start having a different conversation. The purpose of political parties is to win power. That's the fundamental purpose. A political party that has no aspiration to win power is a civil society group or an activist organization. Political parties want to win power. And the conversations we will be having, and we are having as a party, unfortunately, are not conversations about equity and justice. They are more about what do we need to do to win power. Are we going to give it to a popular northern candidate who can energize the huge northern vote? Yeah. Are we going to maybe, since we know the APC is looking south, are we going to maybe try and match them with a southern candidate? Or in spite of the fact that the APC is looking south, are we going to go far north and just run in an opposite direction for them? Because we know how our voting lines are skewed, and hope to get the northern vote and split the southern vote. Those are the types of conversations we're having. Again, because as a political party, we are looking to gain power. And then when we gain power, we can now start zoning and sharing and rotating, like the APC is currently doing. Personally, I would love to see a Nigerian president of Igbo extraction, personally. I currently don't see the energies being put out by potential southeastern candidates. Those energies don't match some of the northern and even southern candidates at the moment. But there's still time. Our timetable just came up. In the next couple of weeks, you'll see a flurry of activity, and then we'll get a clearer sense of who actually are the aspirants for these offices.
That's fair. That's interesting. We'll be watching that and seeing how it turns out. And now, I want your comments on something that happened recently, the court ruling on the defection of Governor Umahi. Now, do you think this has had any effect or will have any impact on the polity?
Absolutely. I read recently that some lawmakers who defected are now defecting back. Absolutely. I agree with the spirit of the judgment. I think, political parties and candidates have very clear manifestos. And so if I vote for you and you are telling me that you are going to run on the PDP that believes in free food, for instance, and you win, it feels almost like fraud if you then leave that free food party and then you go to APC, for instance, that is promising free koboko. It feels almost dishonored because we didn't vote for free koboko. So why are you then taking our votes somewhere else to push a mandate or manifesto we didn't give you? So in that sense, I agree with the spirit. I don't think, especially now that with the new Electoral Amendment Act, we have independent candidates. I don't think if you run on a political party and win, you should be allowed to just decamp and go somewhere else. Yes, your conscience said freedom of association, fantastic, but then you resign and then you go and join the other party, and maybe we hold a by-election if you think you can win on the other platform. I am particularly happy with the punishment meted out to the lawmakers because they had no issue, they had no growl, they had no skin in the game. Because their oga defected, all of them gathered and defected as well. And they chose to show loyalty to their oga rather than loyalty to the party and the electorate that voted them into office. Unfortunately for them, the Constitution is very clear about what happens to you if you're a lawmaker and you defect when there's no faction within your party. You lose your seats automatically. So they have there's no restitution or compensation for them. They've lost their seats. but I'm interested in seeing how this plays out for the governor. I don't think you should defect, but I also need to point out that a part of the judgment says the candidate should submit replacement names. I don't think we should ever be in a situation where elected officers are decided in a party office and you just submit a name and that person now starts representing you. I think at best, if you lose your seat, there should be a by-election.
That's fair. Now, I want to ask if I call it a funny question. Your state, Edo State, Governor Gordon Obaseki, he actually defected from the APC to the PDP. Yeah. And I know there's no case against him, I think, at the moment. But then people say that the second term, he ran on that platform of the PDP. Yeah. But there's a little window where he was a governor and, he moved from APC to PDP. If a case is instituted, do you see that, is that something that, first of all, going by this judgment, does the person serve the remaining tenure of the governor, or do they start afresh? And then can the APC now decide, you know what, let's go back to that era and challenge this case? And that's why I asked them the impact of that decision. Do you see that being an issue?
So the thing is that the context of that conversation was the governor was being run out of his party at the time, and so he literally was forced out. There was a faction within the APC, so there was a split then. So even when he left the APC, he left with a faction of the APC. So there's a slight difference there. The other thing is that courts will not, if you don't approach a court, you won't get any justice. There's no remedy that the court will give you if you don't ask for it. And it's also important to note that there is nothing to remedy. In the Ebonyi situation now, for instance, the PDP is saying that this person parading himself as a governor is not our governor. So we want to get our mandate back so that we can continue to rule the state we're elected to rule. Unfortunately, the passage of time has overtaken any remedy the courts might have given the APC, especially since that tenure has expired and the governor is currently serving a new term as a PDP governor. Maybe this might arise, you mentioned the squabbles in the state. Maybe if the governor decides to leave the PDP, we might be having this conversation. But he has said time and time again that he won't leave. I think this judgment from Ebonyi will give every political office holder pause for thought. I think they'll reconsider just jumping ship and pursue other more democratic ways of solving whatever problems they have.
Right. That's fair. And now we've been talking about the APC and the PDP, and earlier today we actually had a caller on one of our programs saying that basically accused us of campaigning, that we keep mentioning just these two parties and we never go outside. We do actually, but that's another matter. Now, that being said, let's speak about a quote-unquote third force.
Yeah.
Why I say quote-unquote is because several people seem to be parading themselves as the third force. Now, what's your take on that? You said something earlier about the APC being one of the best contraptions of seizing power you've ever seen. Do you see that happening again? Is it possible for a third force to emerge and actually challenge the two major parties at this point?
Not ahead of 2023, no. Is it possible? Yes. But the organization, what happened in 2015 didn't start in 2015. It started long before. There were conversations, there were agreements, there were MOUs, there were broken agreements. There was a lot of dialogue about a realization in the first instance that none of us can do it by ourselves. And then an understanding that they needed to come together to create a force large enough, not a third force, to create an opposition force large enough to compete with the ruling party. Most of our third force politicians don't recognize that. They feel that they can go against the PDP and APC and win. I don't think that's possible. I think in their current formation, the only thing the third force can really realistically do is probably what happened in Osun in 2018, where the PDP and APC were deadlocked, and when they went for the runoff election, the third force candidate, I think it was the SDP candidate Omishore, was being courted by APC and PDP. And when he sided with APC, they won the election. So the third force ahead of 2023 can only play that, weight that tips you over the edge or pushes you past the finish line if you are one of the main parties, if you're either PDP or APC, or if it's a more regional election, maybe APGA in Anambra, for instance. That's the role of the third force. It's literally just to get you first past the post. They haven't organized enough to mount any serious challenge to either the APC or PDP at the national level. That's the unfortunate thing. And it's a frustrating thing because we did say 2023 elections, for instance, if you want to win 2027 election as a third force candidate, start now. You don't start a few months to a general election and say you want anyone to take you seriously. The voting public won't take you seriously. Politicians definitely won't take you seriously. And you end up looking like someone who is just seeking for attention or looking for a cash out. And I think, doing that sort of like destroys faith in and trust and confidence in the value and roles that the third force should play, because they do have a role in democracy, but I don't think they realize what that role is.
That's interesting. Now, still speaking on the third force, there's a sentiment that I know that I've actually seen you address before, and I think you said you wouldn't speak on it again, but sorry, I have to put you on the spot again, which is that a lot of third force and some other persons believe that there's no difference between the APC and the PDP. So whenever they bring themselves up, they say, you know what, these two parties, they are the same, and they need to go, and we are the ones that are different. Now, when you keep hearing that argument, how do you reply when people keep trying to put you in the same bracket with, would I call it your grand rival, and they say you are the same? How do you respond to that? I
think parties have spirits, founding spirits, that give them character, that give them direction. I think the PDP's spirit is clearly different from the APC's. And we've had 8 years almost to see, in real time, what or how different an APC-led government is from a PDP one. And the funny thing is that you can actually look at a governor in the PDP and say this person is not behaving like a PDP man. And you can look at a governor in the APC or a leader in the APC and say the same exact thing. I remember when Matawale, the governor of Zamfara, was handed this Supreme Court victory he didn't earn. And he was doing some things. I remember saying publicly as well that this man isn't acting like he understands that he's a PDP governor. He was doing the pilgrimages and building lodges all over the place, and he was building an airport in a place where there was no passenger traffic too. And I had concerns even back then that this man is not acting like one of us. I remember again saying the same thing about Ayade, Governor Ayade from Cross Rivers, and his cannibalistic, monopolistic budget, budget of nepotism. And I was like, this man doesn't act like he understands that governance is serious. It doesn't act like he understands that his role literally is to serve as opposition to the APC, to show people that, look, I'm ruling this state, this is a PDP state, this is what we can bring to the national. Like Wike is doing, like Obaseki is doing, like Shea Makinde is doing in Oyo State. So I had questions and concerns about some of these actors, let me call them actors. So I wasn't surprised at all when they left the PDP and went to their spiritual homes in the APC. You always hear this cry, this call, APC and PDP are the same, when we start getting close to an election. You always hear it. You always hear from people who have no stake in the game. They are probably living abroad. They probably don't have voters' cards. And they don't understand that what you are doing when you say APC and PDP are the same is that you are telling people that there's no point in voting. And we have seen, as almost as a direct result, voter turnout numbers drop. Election upon election upon election. It kept on joining. There are some elections now that we have less than 10% voter turnout. The governor in Anambra State was elected by about 100 and something thousand votes. How do you elect a governor with that amount of votes? There are House of Rep and senatorial seats that even get more votes. So it annoys me because I keep on saying, outside being partisan, I'm a Democrat, and it annoys me when I see propaganda being pushed that's almost guaranteed to disenfranchise Nigerians. Because if you don't believe in a process, you don't take part in it. So I think that's my annoyance at that particular message. APC and PDP are the same. So let's what? Let's not vote, or let's waste our votes with a party that we know cannot win. The only parties that benefit from third force agitations at this micro level is the ruling party, because every vote cast for anybody but the ruling party is an opposition vote. But instead of voting for a party that can actually challenge, you are splitting the votes and voting for smaller parties. If you put it together, you find that the opposition votes might be 60% and the ruling party will get 40%. But when you break it down, APC will get 40%, PDP will get 30%, YPP will get 10%, and on and on and on. You don't have enough to win. So it's again, like I said, the APC has tried to rule with propaganda. They are brilliant at electioneering. They know how to win power. And when I see honest Nigerians, good-hearted Nigerians, parroting this, because I think this is propaganda, parroting this propaganda and believing it, it just shows me how effective I think the APC propaganda machine is.
Well, just to end it now, you mentioned that you'll be running for House of Reps, and to relate that to the issue of nomination forms, the PDP dropped theirs just recently and said between ages to 25 to 30, there's a discount and all that. And just before this happened, I had a conversation with someone in the running for APC national leader, and he was agitating strongly that the youth of the party would not allow the convention hold because nomination forms are too expensive, youths are not being carried along, and all that. Now, relating to all of this, I know you have you're part of a system or something called the Nigerian Alliance, where you try to help young persons. Now, other than that, how do you think young persons can actually have a chance? And also, because you mentioned that these third force tend to have more powers in this
lower levels.
Yeah. So it's actually possible for these different parties to win elections at these lawmaker levels, but for some reason they don't actually go for it. So that being said, how do you think that can be encouraged so that people don't always just look at the presidency and say everything else doesn't matter?
I think so. You mentioned the Nigerian Alliance. Why we sort of pushed that was the recognition that legislative offices are actually one of the strongest pillars of our democracies, where the laws are made that the executive used to either oppress you or prosper you. And we realized there wasn't a focus there, and there was actually an opportunity, like you said, for young people to get into these offices and start pushing progressive policies. So the Nigerian Alliance came together to identify seats that were winnable, identify candidates that were brilliant, and will support them. So one of the things I know they are doing when you speak about nomination forms is they are, I think, either paying completely or paying a large part of the cost of nomination forms for candidates that they've selected.
Sorry, just to cut in here, is this inter-party or it's
it is the party across parties. So it's APC, PDP, and I think one other party, ADC also. So that's one thing, because it is a problem. I'm running for, like I said, for the House of Reps, and the main thing, unfortunately, you get back home and you want to talk about your policies and your manifestos. You want to talk about the problems you have identified and you want to fix, and really the conversation always pivots back to do you have enough money to to run this election. And it's one challenge I think the PDP recognized, and it's why we sort of have actively said we're going to encourage young people by discounting their forms. Forms for women are free, and we didn't even increase the base rate of the other forms for other offices, apart from, I think, for the presidency. The APC, again, like I said, it's a power holding corporation. And one of the ways to keep people out is to raise the barriers of entry. The biggest of which today is financial. In the poverty capital of the world, if you raise your nomination forms, you are excluding a huge segment of society. You're excluding women and you're excluding young people. Again, as a Democrat, I don't want, it helps us if they do that. But what it ultimately means is that young people in that party don't get platformed. And that, again, isn't good for the health of our democracy. So I would use the opportunity to urge the APC to be like the PDP, copy our template. We're happy to hand it over to you and lower the forms for women, prices for women and young people.
All right, that's fair. Hopefully on another segment of the program or another edition, we'll be able to talk more about your particular brand of ideas as to how you think the country can move forward. Thank you very much for coming to Stop Talk.
Thank you for having me.
All right.